Welcome to Sports CTO Talks. In this series, we would be connecting with technology and sports leaders in the industry and where we will simplify sports technology. I am Ami, your guide on this journey through amazing mind with tech leaders who are shaping the future of sports tech. We will dive deep into discussions and innovations driving the industry, from AI to cloud, from cybersecurity to sustainability. If it is sports tech, we are talking about it. On today's episode, we have with us Keith 𝗍𝗲𝗿𝗆. No, sorry. I will do it again. Wait, I have practiced it.
That's okay.
𝗍𝗲𝗿𝗆, right?
There you go.
𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗲𝗍.
D'Amelio.
𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗍𝗍, yeah.
Yep.
On today's episode, we have with us Keith 𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗆, the founder of 𝗲𝗏𝗍𝗃 Performance, where he designs systems that create a symmetrical advantage for elite teams and organizations. With more than 2 decades of experience in professional sports and human performance, Keith works at the intersection of performance, innovation, and applied science, helping organizations connect with people, product, and decision making into the systems unlock competitive advantage. His work spans both professional sports and the private sector, including roles with the New York Liberty, NBA Players Association, Aura, and over a decade leading global athlete performance initiatives at Nike. Known for his combining insights across disciplines, Keith brings a unique perspective that bridges elite sports, technology, and organizational strategy, helping teams and companies perform at a level their competitors can't replicate. On today's episode, he would be talking about why performance success is a strategy problem and not a science problem, from training rooms to boardroom. We welcome you, Keith, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Perfect. So my first question to you is, most sports organizations chase marginal gains in nutrition, biomechanics, recovery tech, yet the teams consistently winning aren't always the ones with the best labs. Some coaching staffs, front office executives continue to resist data-driven decision making. So where does science end and strategy begin? And why do organizations keep confusing between the two, or is there a thin line between that?
Yeah, good question, and you're right. I think there is a lot of confusion, and I think sometimes that's because especially in elite sport, organizations, they can confuse, like science feels very rigid, right? And that's not really always the way things work in elite sport. And yet strategy on the flip side can sometimes be very seemingly haphazard. So there's a little bit of tension between those two worlds. And again, look, at the easy thing is for an organization to buy force plates or buy a technology. That's easy to do. It's much harder to get organizational alignment on how we make decisions, right? What is our strategy, right? That requires work, collaboration, people sitting down and really discussing ideas and talking through and getting clear on things. And that's not always the case in pro sports as much as people might lead it to be. So, I think science can help explain what is happening, sometimes why, sometimes. But strategy is about deciding what matters most and then what to act on. And I think that's where sometimes the tension between those two exist, right? Science helps improve decisions, but strategy helps determine the relevance of those decisions.
Correct. there is a research which reveals that 68% of top CEOs come from college sports backgrounds, while an extraordinary 94% of women C-suite positions played competitive sports. So, but here's that, tension. If athletic backgrounds are so common in C-suits, why do so many sports organizations still struggle to think, from strategic point of view? And how do you translate to the real audience? Like, because you have immense experience into the field.
It's Well, and the research is really compelling, right? In terms of if you look across, again, Fortune 500 companies, and certainly as you mentioned there, a lot of female C-suite executives, almost I don't want to say all of them, but I can't remember the exact stat, but a very, very high percentage of them played collegiate sports. But that's true in the business world, and I think
Hmm.
they can take some of the learnings in what you get in sport in terms of discipline, follow through, a lot of the things that come with being an athlete into the business world. The issue though in the sports world, and why sports organizations don't always operate like a business, if I just kind of say it very broadly like that, is actually if you look at leaders in the sports world, they don't come from business. Right? It's not the reverse.
Okay.
And I think sometimes they just kind of come up through the ranks of sport world, which no one teaches a lot of the skill sets. If we talk about a general manager or if front office role positions, even coaching to a certain extent, right? No one teaches them in school, right, how to negotiate contracts, how to think through these things that are vital to their job and performing at a high level at their job. They're just kind of expected to learn it as they go, right? And I think that's one of the downfalls there. And it's one thing that I've often thought about is how do you create an environment for those aspects, those roles in an organization to actually develop and learn some of the best practices from the business world, from business schools and things like that, where they can then implement that skill set in the sport environment. But again, as the research shows, a lot of business leaders come from the sport world, but not a lot of leaders in sport come from the business world.
Correct. So, like, how is that gap decreasing or is it increasing, like, from business to sports and sports to business? And is it benefiting, like, you are trying to impart knowledge or people learn on the job? So, is it changing in today's time or what is the situation?
I think it is changing a little bit, and it's different in different sports, right? I think each
Okay.
sport has a little bit of their own cultural norms. So you might see it a little bit more. Again, baseball,
Hmm.
not always, but because I think you have from a front office perspective, very analytically driven. You have, I think, I did a lecture on this not too long ago, but I think the majority of front office positions in the MLB, if we're talking about like general managers and things like that, had law degrees, they went to business school. I think there was even one PhD, right? So you have some leaders in the sport world in some sectors that do have some of that business training. And so maybe they look at it a little bit more,
Hmm.
organizationally based. If you look at another sport, right, they don't. Although, back up on that for 1 minute, is there's also a dichotomy in that in baseball, if I use that example of where you have the front office that has, a background, educational background like that, but then you have the head coaches who are all former players. I think, again, when I did the talk, and maybe it's changed now because it was a few years ago, only one of them had a college degree, right?
Oh.
They just came up as players. So you
Hmm.
even have a difference in terms of like the coaches and managers in baseball as opposed to the front office. And so I think it's a little bit different. It is changing though, because I think as you see, data becoming more used in sports, you're bringing in just a different background of people, and I think they're adding to the overall, organizational decision making process and just how they operate.
Correct. So like these days, teams are heavily investing into performance science, variables, and analytics. But the successful implementation requires demonstrating value through control testing and gradual integration rather than just whole replacement of the existing processes. So, like, are we building a culture where, looking data driven has become more important than actually making better decisions or, playing on the field?
In a lot of places, yes.
Okay.
Um, we are, unfortunately so, right? Because data is only valuable when it changes a real decision, when
Hmm.
it causes a behavior change as well. Um, I think the advantage, 2026, we're not short on data and information, right? And
Correct.
the advantage isn't how can we get more data? It's also knowing what do we need to ignore.
Hmm.
And I think, sometimes a lot of these teams in today's day and age, they just want to collect more data, and then sometimes also falsely assume that they're making better decisions based on the data. And I don't know if a lot of them are, to be honest. I think actually a lot of the data that's collected in the team environment is ignored. It's just collected because they think they should be doing it. So I think, sometimes they're doing it to kind of check a box because, as I said earlier, like it's easy to just get force plates. And if you don't have force plates, again, I'm picking on that as a technology example. Your ownership, your front office, your coaching staff might actually kind of, even the athletes might look at you as if you're not doing something right, as if you're, in some ways like incompetent or negligent by not collecting that data, even if for you in your approach, that data actually isn't additive. Right. So I think sometimes it does become, oh, we're just going to collect a bunch of data and oh, we're making data-driven decisions when they're really not actually causing enhanced decision making.
So, how can someone understand that, they are just collecting data and it's not going to change or it's not going to impact? Like, how, from a time point duration, how, like, by what time someone should understand that, yeah, we are just collecting data, nothing more.
Yeah, look, if the staff can't explain, or if the organization, whatever department the data is coming from, if it's medical and performance, if it's coaching staff because I want this metric on our athletes, cool. But if you can't explain how that metric is going to change behavior or outcomes and enhance decisions, then it's probably just theater, right? It's
Hmm.
just you're just going through the motions to do it, to either say you're doing it, to either trick yourself, right? That, oh, we're using data in our decision making, or to trick other people that you're using data and try and make it, this false, kind of approach to how you make decisions.
So, what is the
Because
hard?
again, good implementation of data, it's gradual. It isn't,
Correct.
you're not going to give me one piece of data that's instantly going to change everything, or it certainly shouldn't. Sorry, right? And it's also, especially in elite sport, there's a trust component to it with the athlete, with the data itself, right? Do you trust the data that you're getting? But you also have to make it a two-way street with the athlete so that you are getting quality data.
Okay. There is a report by McKinsey's organizational health data. It shows that companies that are actively, that listen and act on recommendations from frontline employees are 80% more likely than their peers to implement new and better ways of doing things. So, how do you translate that principle to a locker room principle or a performance department where frontline is the athlete?
One of the phrases that I use a lot is the athletes, but you can substitute coach, you can substitute owner, whatever it is within an organization, but athletes in particular, because if we're saying we're collecting a lot of the data on the athlete,
Hmm.
they need to be brought into the conversation. I think more often than not, what a lot of organizations do is they collect data on the athlete. Sometimes they share it with the athlete, A lot of times they don't, unfortunately.
Hmm.
And then they just expect the athlete to kind of almost blindly do what they say, right? And like when again, if you put yourself in the lens of the athlete, one, that's their livelihood. So, and some athletes, look, some athletes care a lot more about understanding the data on themselves than others do, for sure. That is a fair statement. But even for the ones who don't, I still think they should be brought into the conversations so that they have an understanding of why you're actually making these decisions and recommendations to them in the first place. Because I think, again, back to my earlier point, if you can't describe what this data is how it is helping you make better decisions, then is it really helping you make better decisions? Right. And I think, when you bring athletes into the conversation, they become one better educated, which I think is always a good thing about themselves, because again, that is their livelihood. I think it allows them to then ask better questions, which it's interesting because I've never played in the NBA. I've worked in the NBA, but I don't know what it's like to go play 82 games in front of 17,000 fans every night. And, so if I can educate them, they can maybe ask me better questions, which then maybe allows me to go find a better solution. Or actually, wow, that's a really interesting question. I had never thought about it from that perspective. But if I'm not engaging them in a conversation, then I lose a lot of the value in that. Same thing from coaches. If I'm collecting data and trying to then recommend things to coaches and ideas or change strategy in some way, I should probably invite them into the conversation and understand how they think about whatever it is I'm collecting, right? Because maybe that adds context that I'm not thinking about because they have a domain expertise I do not. And so I think a lot of times listening to that front line, like it allows you to get to a better end result. But I don't think it's something that people do enough.
So from a timeline perspective, like when should be there a hard stop that data is not generating any value? It can be to the athlete, to the coach, or to an organization as a whole.
I think it depends on the question you're trying to answer, which that's probably your first part of the timeline that I don't know if enough teams. There's some really good teams that do this, and then there's not. But actually, did we spend more time in understanding the question we are trying to answer?
Okay.
Because if you spend more time on that on the front end, which again, it's tedious, it's labor intensive to really drill down to exactly what question are we trying to like problem are we trying to solve? Like it helps you get to the end result and be able to end it quickly because you realize, nope, that solution is not going to work for that problem. And then you can iterate quickly or a little bit quicker than normal. But if you're just blindly searching around for solutions to a problem you haven't fully articulated and defined, then you don't actually really know when to end that timeline because you're kind of guessing a little bit. So I think the work to accelerate the end or the advancement starts at the beginning, not at the end.
Okay. Like Western Michigan's athletic program, you might be aware, I'm sure, that rose from an average ranking of ninth in MAC conference play to fourth over a time of only 3 years after deliberating resetting organizational standards. So, like, what does that kind of turnaround actually look like from the inside? And what's the first strategic move you would do in an organization?
The biggest lever you can pull in an organization is clarity, right? And I think a lot of people want to start with actually the opposite, even though they might not word it like this, but they start with complexity. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. They're going to do all these things to create a turnaround, but yet all that does is create noise and complexity, right? As opposed to simplify things down and get really clear on organizational alignment across the board, right? again, the best organizations, they don't separate science, coaching, strategy, management, right? They look to integrate them. And not only in that integration, they look to get clear so that I understand when our head coach says a word that they deem to be important, everybody should understand the meaning of that word. I think a lot of times people just say words in an organization. Again, if I just use that as a simple example, and they either just assume everybody knows exactly what they mean when they say that word. But if they haven't spent the time to make sure there's clarity on that word, well, I might hear a coach say that, or my owner or my general manager, and I have my own interpretation of what that means. They think I am interpreting the way they mean it, but I'm not. And so that creates a little bit more complexity and just confusion in things. So if you're going to start a turnaround, I think you have to start with the basics, and you have to start with clarity, and then what are the standards of that organization, right? It's not technology. It's what are our standards as an organization, it's a resetting of expectations, and again, getting everybody aligned on what that organization stands for. That's how I think you then accelerate the outcome on the back end.
Okay. So, in the last decade, consistently informal athlete leaders, not just only team captains, are often real drivers of teams, as we were discussing previously, like functioning and the effectiveness. So, but yet most performance systems are designed top down, even today. So, how do you build a strategy that captures informal influence, rather than just fighting for it and making it more difficult?
Yeah, it's fun in pro sports. Although it's probably the same well, it is, at least in my experience in the private sector as well. But there's two org charts, right? There's the formal one. There's the one that's on paper that is very clean, and there's lines connecting everybody. And then there's the real one,
Correct.
right? There's the one that the athletes in the organization actually how they function, not how it's designed on paper. And I think understanding that is key to exactly what you said there, right? Because the goal isn't to like control influence; it's understand it, and how we channel it. And again, I think a lot of the ways that the best teams do is they invite the stakeholders into the conversations. It is not just a one-way conversation in talking at an athlete, at a coach. It's bringing them, inviting them into the conversation. And again, if you have a good understanding of how the pulse of your organization and team and the locker room, if we're keeping it from an athlete perspective, you understand who is influential in that conversation, and you have to make them a part of it.
Like when you're talking about the stakeholders, and when we talk about transformational leadership, can you actually engineer psychological momentum, or do you just create conditions for that to take place?
I think you have to build the conditions for that to emerge. And then as it emerges, you have to cultivate it. And again, continue to kind of foster how that, and then that's how you kind of you can roll that snowball down the hill and it becomes bigger and bigger. I think, artificially manufacturing it is probably not going to work, maybe it will work in a quick moment, but it won't be sustainable. It won't be something to build on, right? And that's where, again, good strategy, it builds small wins, which then build into systems, which then build into the belief. And now there's something that everybody can attach to. And it also becomes an identity, which then even more can reinforce how you build that momentum as an organization. And look, the metrics that you're collecting, they matter, but how the athletes respond to the meaning of them, to their progress, and to the confidence that they have, if we're using, kind of data as an example there, like that helps you build it. Because if the athletes don't have confidence in what you're building, really tough to build momentum. So I think, again, you have to build the conditions where that organizational momentum, and you can build on successes and wins. Also, the structure of that, and if you create the conditions in a, not in a manufactured way, but in a genuine way, it allows also for the process to be the focus and not the outcome. Because, look, nothing is concrete and nothing is, definitive, especially in sport. So you have to be able to weather the ups and downs, if you will. And if you don't have, creating the conditions that allow that, belief and confidence in what you're doing, which then build the momentum, that's at the slightest dip or, unexpected results or, kind of poor result, if you will, right? Maybe you lose that. Right. Then that's where I think, artificially trying to manufacture it, you can run into problems.
There is a study by EY back then, quite some time back. So like it survey like of women executives, 74% said a sports background has helped them accelerate a career, and 61% credited athletic involvement with their career success. For the top skills cited was ability to see projects through and through to completion. So, but what skills from elite performance environments that organizations consistently undervalue when they hire or develop leaders?
I think the first one that comes to mind is follow through and consistency, right? I think what you can learn in sports of, again, keeping the standards, even when the novelty wears off, right?
Hmm.
And again, if you're talking about business leaders, like sometimes no, we have to be consistent in our approach. We have to be consistent in honing in on that message. And I think that's, sports, certainly in good environments, can teach you that, right? Because high performance is not about hype. It's not about, the flashiness. Sometimes that gets sensationalized, especially in today's world. But true high performance is about, sustainability and is about, reliable completion of the task. And I think that's one of the things that sport can help instill in certain business leaders that I don't know if it's always captured in that hiring process, to your point.
Okay. But like there are organizations, sometimes they overinvest in measurements and underinvest in meanings. Like the most successful sport organization treats analytics as a strategic capability that enhances, human decision making rather than replacing it. So, like, can you share a few examples where more data actually created a performance problem and how strategy fixed it?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways, right? I think again in the without being too specific on an example, I think again as we've discussed here today, there's no shortage of data right now. So
Correct.
I think, right, collecting data and a lot of this, you could probably point at least the athlete readiness. And there's so much data, right? And we can collect all this data and, oh, this shows us this. And, Keith is under recovered today and, his readiness is down. But again, if I haven't included the athlete into the conversation and really understood the context, like, well, but I feel fine. And that's where I think sometimes the data can be not necessarily always misleading, but it doesn't tell the full story. And I think, actually taking a step back and spending time on, okay, how are we actually going to make our decisions? What information is going to lead us down one path versus another? What information, to my earlier point, are we going to ignore? Right? Am I going to supersede an athlete who tells me I feel great because their data says they don't feel great? Right? A simple example that took me a little bit of time to learn in my career path is in the recovery as I talk here, in that area, because I think early in my career, we could look at, well, the research shows that this recovery intervention isn't going to work. But the athlete says, yeah, but I feel better when I do that. And I used to, foolishly argue with the athlete until
Mm.
like finally one day, like I kind of took a step back. I'm like, wait a second. They're telling me they feel better. Who am I to say that they don't feel better?
Correct. Correct.
And I think that's oftentimes like still the case in other areas, not always in that area, but even in other areas where I think, people kind of lose the plot a bit.
Okay. And like, in continuation with in this only, like when we talk about Formula One, as much as billion data points can be analyzed during a single race in real time. But yet human element remains crucial and critical there. And data serves as, just helping or part of it. So what would it look like to truly apply that architecture into real time, human in loop, strategy driven to a sports team or a athlete development program?
Right. I think again, this is and I know, maybe some of the listeners are like, oh, Keith's talking about strategy again, but in alignment. But that's where I think there's just so
Exactly.
much untapped resource, or in possibility, because in an example like that, right, what it would look like is not flooding coaches or decision makers with more information, right? That's not going to help anybody. um, right, it's translating that data, which I think is still the gap in a lot of places, but it's translating that data into, you know key high value decision making, idea. And again, ultimately the coach, the team manager in F1, they have to make the decision, right? But how can you present the information to allow them to do their job best, which I think is a capability of AI as well, which maybe we'll touch on here later. That can help with. It can't solve it because I think again humans have to be in the loop if we're talking about some of these things. So I think again it's that operating model matters. It's finding the right data, but that's being clear on the front end. It's also having the person that can translate the data the best, or the best way in being able to filter their experience, their intuition, if you will, and allowing that data to help support the decision, right? Not and they have to be open to that data maybe being in conflict with the decision they want to, and then understanding the context, right? Because I don't think the future is automated decision making. It's more augmented decision making, right? How is this data helping me augment my decision making to get to the best outcome?
Correct. As you said, like my next question was related to AI. So, like, what is AI? What is the role of AI, or how is it helping with strategy making? And is it improving? It can be into the locker room, it can be into the boardroom, it can be anywhere. So, how are we looping it in today? And how is it benefiting the sports industry at the end?
I think it is absolutely beneficial, right? Because again, as the data availability is not our issue in 2026. Making meaningful connections and translating that data into decisions, right? That's still the gap. And I think where AI can be useful is kind of helping maybe see some connection points that maybe on the surface are tougher to see with the host of data that we have, which then maybe connects 2 points in an organization or two different ideas to get to an outcome that we didn't recognize, or it just puts it it frames it in a way that the expert human can make a better decision. So I think AI definitely serves a role in sport, and I think the role that it serves is helping connect data points, potentially show some of these connections, and helps reduce the gap in that translation.
Okay. And how are organizations evolving and growing and helping athletes or the people into the industry, to become great strategy thinkers or to become strategy thinkers and who can operate in any high performance environment?
I don't know if all of them are.
That's
That is certainly what I think. I mean, again, the premise of the question, and even the question itself is phenomenal, because I do think that that should be how we think about it, right? Is I think we should expand the definition of development, for our athletes, for our leaders in an organization, for the staff in an organization, as we come into it. And I think, to my point earlier about bringing the athlete, if we just keep it centered on the athlete for a second, right, bringing them into the conversation, they should understand how these systems work. They should understand, like, the data that's collected on them. And I know a lot of, again, one of my roles, I consult for the NBA Players Association on, wearable technology and, data science, and a lot of these things that fall into that. And that's one of the things that I always talk about is, the athletes need to be better consumers of information on themselves. And I know it's part of all the collective bargaining agreements now that the players own their data, and they should own their data. But they should be taught to understand how these systems work, why decisions are made, and hopefully, and again, it's not for everybody, and that's not just unique to athletes. That's unique to people working, in a big company, right? Some really want to understand the why. Some could care less. They're just punching a clock and they just want to show up and go do what they do. But I think even those, the people on that end of the spectrum, the people who are seemingly, uninterested, there's still a way to bring them into the conversation. And then little by little, you're still enhancing their ability to understand what's going on. And then, I would like to think that grows them professionally, more than just the physical, sporting skill that they possess.
I have a lot of questions, but I'll stick to one last question. Like, if you could mandate one change, not a technology one, not a training protocol, but a strategic or an organizational shift across every elite performance program globally, like, what would it be and why?
I would I would try and, well, I would force might be a strong word, but I would mandate, right, that every organization builds decision-making architecture into their process, right? That they have a framework on how they make decisions that they go through every time before they just either add a new tool or a new idea, and again, help that then, right, helps them decide what actually matters. And it might not be a new technology, and I'm not even saying it in the technology world. It could be anything, right? If we're going to make a trade as a team, what is our decision-making process? And then what I would add on to that too, because I think it's part of the whole decision-making framework, is because this is one thing that I think in sports they do very across the board, at least in my experience, do poorly, um, is what's the review of that decision, right? How do we sit down after a decision's been made, after we've kind of seen the result, and maybe it hasn't like fully manifested in terms of the result, but how do we actually go back and review our decision-making process to see where, man, okay, that was a poor decision, or the outcome was poor, but like, okay, let's go back through our process and like, what happened here that resulted in that, that poor outcome? And maybe it was just, something that we didn't foresee, or, it wasn't necessarily a breakdown in the process, but okay, now how can we go back and add something into our framework that allows us to, again, no decision is ever going to be perfect, but in the name of sport, or the private sector, it's how do we skew the probabilities into better outcomes for us so we can have a competitive advantage? And I think a lot of teams miss the ability to do that and to skew the results in their favor more because they lack that sort of decision architecture. So that's one thing. If I could change anything in an organization, that is the one thing I would try and I would mandate that an organization implements and
Absolutely.
then is consistent with.
Absolutely. Keith, we'll move on to the next segment of the podcast. That's the rapid fire round. I'll ask you a few questions and you'll have to be quick in answering. It's one word or max one sentence.
Oh, okay. All right. I gotcha.
Okay. Data or instinct? What wins championships today? Tough one.
Instinct. If I have to
Okay.
pick one, instinct.
Okay. One sports tech tool you think is overrated right now?
One tool.
Sports tech tool.
If I had to pick one tool, I'm gonna cheat here a little bit. I'm gonna use the workload management, like anything that fits under that, because I don't think teams are and I know I'm going way over the one word description. I don't think teams are still utilizing that data set well.
Okay.
So I can't pick one tool in there, but I would say anything that's the sort of we're monitoring our players' workload. Are you really changing things? I'm not sure. So I would say that's probably still overrated right now.
Okay. Variables, performance enhancer or data overload? You can't take this much time.
I know. They could be both. You're asking me questions that have context to them,
I
right? And,
know.
and and I think that's the problem. I would say performance enhancer.
Okay. If you had to remove all tech from training for a week, is it chaos or clarity?
Oh, clarity in a heartbeat. You
Okay.
get real clear on things for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
AI in sports, coach's best assistant or biggest distraction?
Better, best assistant.
Okay. One metric every team tracks, but probably shouldn't.
I don't know what. Workload data.
Okay. This is the last one. Finish the sentence. The future of elite performance will be less about dash and more about dash.
It will be less about collecting everything and more about knowing what matters.
Perfect. We'll move on to the next segment. You have to just answer one question into 30 seconds. The role of AI in bridging the gap from training room to boardroom, and why performance success is ultimately a strategy problem, not just a science problem.
I think, as I said it before, right? AI can help translate that complexity into, hopefully clarity, right? The gap between the training room and the team in the boardroom, it's not a science problem, right? It's a prioritization problem, communication problem, and then ultimately a decision-making problem. And I think AI can help bridge that gap and make those connections clearer and potentially happen faster.
Perfect. Thank you, Keith, for joining us today and sharing wonderful insights on the podcast.
Absolutely. I appreciate having me and really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. So everyone, let's stay connected and please share this episode with all the people who love sports and technology. We will meet in the next episode next week. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring.